Hello, my name is Craig Brasco. I am an associate professor in the School of Art and Design at Kennesaw State University, and I am participating in the summer intensive this year with some videos about digital painting. And I'm going to start with this video today, which is a basic Photoshop digital painting tutorial, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And hopefully what you guys see is this is the interface for Adobe Photoshop. Um, so if you have Adobe Photoshop, feel free to follow along. If you don't, if you have other apps that you're using, maybe like Procreate on an iPad or something like that, um, these techniques should still work. I'm going to try my best to at least refer to that. Other programs that you might be using like Krita or Clip Studio Pro or something like that, they have similar functionality as well. I've been using Photoshop for a long time, so this is the easiest one to use to teach with. It's the most prevalent that's out there. In case you're wondering, because a lot of parents and students ask me this question, um, you can get a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. So let me pull that up real quick. So as a student, you have a rate that's pretty affordable. It's $20 a month for a student to get access to Creative Cloud. So what you can do is just do a search for student Creative Cloud, and you'll get to this website and you'll see the pricing here at the bottom. And as long as you're a student, that's the rate. Once you graduate or from college, actually, or even grad school, I guess, that price starts to go up. Obviously, it depends on professionals pay about $60 a month for the use of this stuff. That's why some of these alternatives I mentioned are better, because they're a little bit cheaper for sure. The other thing I want to point out is that I'm also using a Wacom tablet to draw with. So if you can see the camera in the corner there, this is my Wacom pen, and I also have a tablet here with me. I also use a Cintiq, but for these videos, I decided just to keep it simple in terms of uh, being able to record and all that stuff. So the Cintiq might be a little bit harder to use. You don't have to have a Cintiq or anything fancy. It definitely helps. There's no doubt about it. But I'd like to feature a product here that I recommend to my beginning students here at KSU because it's affordable in terms of a starter pad, if you will. So Wacom is not known for their um, ease of use website. So let me focus in here on the website URL for those that are interested. So it's just wacom.com and click on their products and then go to the pen tablets. This one is the one I was interested in, is the one by Wacom. So if you click on this, it's a very small tablet, and what I'm looking for is this one. It's the Wacom Intuos S Black. So it's about $80, and that's actually, I think, pretty affordable. So sorry, I got to go back there. There we go. Um, the reason I think it's affordable is because most students that at KSU, they spend that much easily on textbooks for their classes and whatnot. So this is, I think, is pretty affordable. What's the difference between these tablets? The bigger the tablet is, the more detailed your brushstroke is, let's just say, the more brush cycles that you get is what it's called. So obviously, like, having a bigger tablet is definitely advantageous, but I don't think it's required. I think you can actually learn still quite a bit and still do drawings and paintings with these smaller tablets. I started out with one like this when I was in grad school and was fine. Naturally, I wanted to get a bigger tablet over time, and I, saved up money and got a better tablet. But for a student who's just starting out, if you're on a budget, especially, any of these would be fine. Just be careful, because really what you're usually paying for is some feature like Bluetooth, or just because it has a color or something like that. So that's why I recommend this particular model, the Wacom Intuos S Black. I'll go ahead and say again, that another alternative to all this is, if you can afford it, is an iPad. The newest model, I think, is the iPad Pro 3, and it's very good. And I would recommend that along with an Apple Pencil. And then the application that I use the most for that is called Procreate, which is only for tablets. You can't get it on desktops, at least not yet. I really hope one day they change their mind and do that. But this is the application, and it's very affordable. And I'd say, actually, compared to the price of buying a computer that can run Photoshop and buying a Wacom device and all that, you're actually better off getting an iPad if you're on a budget. It's actually a lot more affordable to just do it that way. Professionally speaking, yeah, I know plenty of professionals that use Procreate versus Photoshop. It's becoming more and more prevalent, actually, every month that goes by. So I do recommend it. As far as like in the classroom, though, it's just more reasonable for me to teach Photoshop. The skills are transferable. In fact, there's elements of Photoshop you can put into Procreate, and they're very aware of that. So they're, trying to just cater to the marketplace. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and drop back here into Photoshop. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is show this layer here with my email address at school. So my address is cbrasco@kennesaw.edu. Any questions that you have at all about anything I discuss, whether it's software or hardware, questions about what you should do or what programs you should be using or anything like that, I'm happy to answer those questions. Also, any questions you have at all about the demo today, I'd be happy to answer those. Also, I have some files that I'm using for this demo that you guys are welcome to have. I think the easiest way to do that is just email me and say, hey, I'm watching your video and I need the files that you referenced in the video, please. And I'll be happy to send those. I actually have a Dropbox link that I use for all this. I'm going to try to share that when the school posts our videos, and hopefully we'll be able to include that as a link. But I am more than happy to receive emails from viewers that want the files, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so what are we doing today? Today I'm going to cover basic techniques for painting digitally. And this is a demo that I've done many times, and some of you that have participated in Summer Intensive may have done this before. Practice makes perfect. If you've never done this before, this is a great way to start learning how to use a Wacom tablet and just how to paint using your own skills, hopefully from traditional work. So what we're going to paint today is an apple, and what I have is a picture of an apple that I've used for years. I probably should pick a new one, but I really like this apple. It's just lit exactly the way I'd like to, basic academic lighting. There's a light source in the upper left. There's a nice shadow on the right, and there's really nothing cluttering up the image. It's just this very simple apple. So what I like to do is, normally when I'm painting digitally, I like to use a reference of some kind, and this is that reference. Now, because of screen space and making this video, I normally open this image that I'm using, whatever it is, in a program called Preview. But because of space limitations, I'm actually going to put this into my Photoshop file, which I don't usually do. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this file and drag it directly into Photoshop like this. So I took it from my Finder folder and I just placed it directly into Photoshop. Now, I'm going to use my cursor to grab the bottom right corner and just scale up this apple, like so. And I think I'm just going to scoot this over a little bit so that it's not taking up too much space. There's nothing wrong with doing this, like putting a reference into your image, but I try to avoid that. The temptation is to trace over the image or sample colors directly from the image, which I don't recommend. We're going to talk about that more briefly. But the idea is that you just have a visual reference. Now, if you can draw from life, that's even better. Have something in front of you that you can draw. The only thing I recommend is that you have good lighting. So the best thing is just a lamp that has some bendable portion that where the light can be adjusted in terms of its position. Or if you can get a spot lamp, that's also good, that has a clamp. Then you can just attach that to anything, like a chair or a broom or something like that, and just use that to light your subject. I always like to use the upper left, so the left side of the object or objects, to light it. I try to do that as much as possible. Sometimes I change that or do something different, but just for basics, that's the best way to go. Okay, so how do I draw in Photoshop? That's a very good question. So I'm going to make a new layer here. And this is the layers window, by the way. So I have a certain group of windows that I like to use in Photoshop. So I'm going to, before I get too far ahead here, I'm going to collapse these together. And I'll zoom in on this so you can see it. All right. So windows in Photoshop are basically little panels that have like special tools that allow you to do things. So I have this certain group that I use all the time. This first one is called Colorist, and this is actually a purchased plugin that I have that I use for painting. So I'm not gonna, I can talk about that more later or probably in a different video. Brushes, this one is a collection of all the brush tools and drawing tools that I use. Some of them are built into the software and some of them I've created. The next one is swatches. So this is like a collection of colors that I like to paint with. Color is something more like a larger selection of color that I can choose from, like as if I had any like paint to squeeze on my palette. That's what this is. And then paths. So paths is a way to do selections. We're going to do that a little bit today. I'm going to demonstrate how to use paths. And then finally, layers. So layers is probably the most important thing. I got to zoom back out because I think when I'm zoomed in, it won't let me show the menus. Okay. So layers are basically how you can have, the way I like to describe it is like, it's like a stack of paper. So imagine paper that you put into the copy machine. Each layer is a piece of paper, except that it's see-through. You can see below it to the next piece of paper underneath, unless you put something on the layer that can't be seen through, like it's opaque. You can have as many layers as you want. You can reorganize them any way you like, so you can drag layers like so. And there's many other things you can do. You can make them invisible like this with the eyeball. You can lock them so that they can't be used. And then there's another feature here called preserve transparency. We're going to use that later too, because that's a really nice tool. But in general, the idea is that layers are just a way to have multiple images on different parts of your file so that you don't have to draw everything in the same layer. Now, I tend to do that actually because I was trained as an oil painter. And oil painting, you know, you're working on a canvas and that's pretty much it. There are no layers. Of course, you can do things like scrape paint off if you make a mistake or use turpentine to rub out something. But, you know, when I first got into digital media, it was like, oh, wow, I can kind of cheat, or I can, you know, hey, I've got this way to break up my image, like into literally a background maybe and a middle ground and a foreground, and they all look, you know, like they're together. That's really cool. At the same time, though, it's easy to fall into a trap where you use just too many layers. So you want to try to avoid that. Okay, so here are the brushes. I'm going to try and zoom in on this. I don't know if I can. There we go. Yeah, it just doesn't like that. So let me zoom back out. Sorry. So under general brushes, you get the built-in brushes. So these are pretty great. These were actually developed by an artist who designed these brushes years ago, and he's really good at it. In Photoshop, you can make your own brushes, and he was so, I guess, practiced at it that he made a deal with Adobe, and they bought all his brushes, and now they're part of the program. That's been that way for about a year or so, maybe a couple years now. So what I recommend is start with that. You know, find some brushes that are here and just try them out. See what they do. Some brushes actually make marks like you would with the pencil, and some brushes do different things like smear things together like this one does. And some of them make like a pattern and have texture. And you know, the brush names tend to tell you what they do, but that's not always true. Um, so it's really fun just to kind of experiment and, you know, see what these brushes can do. And I don't think there's a um, such a thing as a perfect brush. You know, I've had people ask me that. You know, I think the built-in brushes. I've had many friends that they just make a whole image with one brush, and it's simple. It's just like this simple round brush right here. You know, nothing really important or fancy, if you will. That's how they do their work. So I think it's just a matter of just like real art, you know, traditional art, finding the tools that you like and just um, work with that. And then over time, what's going to happen is you'll find new things to use and new tools, and you'll figure out your own way of doing stuff. So I do happen to have, though, a collection of brushes that I've created over the years, and here they are. And I have, you know, drawing brushes and painting brushes and whatnot. So you guys are welcome to have these. The way these work, by the way, how you install them, it's pretty easy. There's a menu right here. And what you do is you click on this menu. It's like lines that are stacked up. Some people call these pancake menus. Um, but when you click on this, what happens is you get this new menu that pops out, and you just say import brushes. So import brushes will allow you to grab a brush file and install it. If you go online and just do a search for Photoshop brushes, you'll find all kinds of stuff. Like I said, if you want mine, you can just email me and I'll be happy to email those to you. What you'll see though is something like this. It's a file that'll be called brushes or something like that. And then it'll say .abr. So that's how you know it's a brushes file. And what you'll usually see is just a collection of brush shapes. Like this is an artist I really like from China, and he's really, really good. And so he has all these cool brushes that I just, you know, mess around with and experiment with from time to time. Let's see. So that's how you use brushes or install them. And then the colors that I use, I'm going to be using two things for that. So here's the color window, and here is the swatches window. So the swatches window now has folders. It used to not. It used to just have this grid of color, and it didn't have options. Now you can actually have multiple palettes at the same time, which is really cool, because in this case, I'm using this palette, which it's designed when you make it a certain size that it turns into a color wheel like this. So when you stretch the window out, it turns into this. Now, things have changed a good bit because of these multiple palettes now with the folders. You just don't have a whole lot of room, unfortunately. So the window becomes really large. So I have to use small thumbnails. That's what I did here. I just changed that to make it tinier. I don't know what tiny looks like. That's probably too small. Let's see. That's not too bad. That's actually usable. I'll try that. Um, Sometimes, you just don't have a lot of room on your screen. And, if you're like me, I'm just using a laptop. That's another advantage of getting a Cintiq monitor is that it can act as a second monitor. So that is a nice thing to have. Okay. Um, by the way, we're trying to keep these videos short, but it's so hard to do that. There might be moments in the video where I have to speed things up just to make it less than an hour. So just bear with me if that happens. Um, but that's just, we're trying to keep these videos kind of short. It's just there's so much to talk about. Um, so we're going to go ahead and get started now that I've got my color palette here, and I'm going to be using my brushes. So I'm going to start with this #1 pencil rough. It's pretty much the same as, let's say, um, Kyle's got a good brush for this. Like the Ultimate Pencil Hard Brush or the Drawing Box Happy HB. Those two are pretty much the same. So if you want to try those, that'll work. Naturally, if you're interested in digital painting, like I said, just get online and look for Photoshop brushes. You'll find all kinds of great brushes out there. I'm going to go ahead and fill this canvas with gray. So that's under Edit, Fill, and I'm going to select 50% gray. There we go. And before I go any further, in case you're wondering, this is a image that is 17 inches wide and 11 inches tall. That's a tabloid sized piece of paper. I like to use a nice big canvas when I paint. And the resolution of this document is 300 ppi, pixels per inch. So there you go. That's a better representation. So under image size, that's where you can see this. Now, why do I work at this size? Well, because I like to have a big piece of paper. Like when I buy sketchbooks, I usually buy those really big folio size ones. I don't like tiny sketchbooks, especially because if I ever do figure drawing or anything like that, I got to have space. Little tiny sketchbooks are great. They're fun for just doing doodles and stuff. But when I like draw things, I like to have a nice big piece of paper. Also, the resolution, the reason I have it set to 300 is because that is life size. So according to a printer, if you set your resolution of an image to at least 300, it's going to print out 1-to-1. In other words, I will need a piece of paper that is 17 inches wide and 11 inches tall to print out this file, essentially. If it's anything less than that, then you're going to be dealing with an image that's either smaller or doesn't have as much detail. So black and white, you can kind of get away with a half of this resolution. Most images you see on the internet are actually 1/4 of this, which is roughly 72, 75 pixels per inch, like this apple here. You don't want that. If you're creating imagery, let's say for Instagram or something like that, and you don't ever plan on printing it out, I guess that's okay. But if you ever plan to print out your work at all, whether for a portfolio or for a show or as a gift or something like that, or to sell, like if you want to sell prints on Etsy or whatever, you definitely are going to need to consider your resolution. And I can't stress that enough. 300 ppi minimum. I've worked at 600 before, but I never really saw the point. 300 is sufficient. Really, it's about physical dimension, like the actual physical size that matters the most. So this is another reason why I chose this size, by the way. All right. So now after all that, we can do some painting. So what I'm going to do is come back here to my layers and just make sure I'm taking care of business. So here's my Apple picture. And you can double click on a layer and change its name. So I'm going to call this Apple Ref for reference. Then I have this layer that's gray. That's my background. So I'm just going to call that BG. This is just my email address down here. So we can just forget that. Now I'm going to make a new layer. To make a new layer, at the bottom of the layer window, you'll see this little button. It's a square with a plus sign. The old version of Photoshop, it looks like a piece of paper with a little dog ear and a plus sign. Pretty much the same thing. I'm going to change this and call it Sketch. So what I like to do is, when I draw, is sketch out my subject. So I'm going to choose a color on the color wheel that's like a darker purple color, like this. And here's my brush. This is the #1 brush that I'm using from my own brush collection. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gesture out this apple. So that word gesture, what that means is I'm trying to just very quickly sketch out what I see. And this comes from figure drawing, actually. So figure drawing is where you draw live models and they move around and they change their pose all the time. And it's drawing from life, essentially. So I'm a big fan of gesture drawing because it makes you really kind of think about what you're drawing. And it, you know, I mentioned earlier this issue about tracing and all that stuff. You know, honestly, I think if you're a true beginner and you've never done any drawing at all, tracing can help because I guess it can help you understand line and volume, like how big something actually is. So that makes sense. But the problem with tracing is, well, it's not very lifelike, first of all, and eventually, you know, what's going to happen is it becomes a crutch, and people will be able to tell that you're actually tracing things. So it's a great way to learn stuff. As a matter of fact, directly copying something by tracing over it, I think, like I said, has some dexterity benefits, but only just, and really you can't do a whole lot of that. But this other thing called master copies, a lot of artists do this. And a master copy is when you find a fine art piece that you really like, or just whatever, an artist that you enjoy, and you basically paint and draw their drawing or painting. You don't trace it, you just look at it like what I'm doing here with the apple, and you render it. I think that's a wonderful lesson. It's the same thing in music. If you play an instrument, when you do sight reading, like you basically try to read a piece of music that you've never seen before and try to play it, that's what a master copy is in art. You're actually looking at like a composition that somebody's already done and trying to emulate what they've done. So it's very much like sight reading in music. And I think it's a great practice. You can learn a lot. All right, so what am I using here? This is the brush tool, but I'm also using the eraser tool to just go back and take out some of the sketch that I've done, just to kind of refine some lines and things like that. And actually, I kind of wanted to avoid any shading, so I'm just going to, remove that as well. So you can press B on your keyboard for brush, and then you can press E for eraser. To change the size of your brush, you can just hit these keys. I'm going to paint them here. So there's the bracket keys. There's the left and the right bracket keys. Those are really great. So if you hit the left bracket key, we have a brush active. It makes the brush tiny. If you press the right bracket key, it makes it bigger. And if you just hold it down, it just, goes up and down like that. It's pretty great. There are other tools to do that, like windows and stuff, but I try to avoid that. Okay, so this is just a basic sketch of my apple. I've tried to also include the shadow underneath it. And you can take time anytime you want to go back and, refine your sketch. If you don't like what you've drawn, just, erase it and start over, or you can delete the layer sketch and make a new one and then just replace that. That's the really cool thing about digital media. It's really easy to repeat stuff. You don't have to, it's not like, balling up a piece of paper or something like that and starting again. It's actually pretty easy. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So what do I do next? Like, what's the next thing? Well, I need to take into consideration actually light and shadow. So if you look at this apple, it's got some pretty cool passages of light here. In fact, there's a nice highlight right there. And then there's also this nice shadow. And a nice shadow under the leaf. The other part of that, of course, is color. I need to understand what colors I'm going to be using. So the easiest way to do this is to use a technique where you're basically painting in what I call silhouettes of each part of the apple. And then we're going to use a special layer tool to allow us to paint in the lines, if you will, so that it stays pretty clear. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that. So I also like to control the quality of the edge too. So it's okay to paint with a brush to do the silhouette part for something smaller, like maybe this stem and the leaf, but I'm going to use paths to help me with the apple itself. So here's the paths window. And the tool that gets used with paths is called the pen tool. So here it is. The pen tool looks like an old school crow quill pen, like a dip pen is what some people call these. And I'll draw this on the screen to see so you can see better what it looks like. Like this. So it has this little base like that, and then there's the pen itself. So what this thing does is pretty great. It allows me to draw. It's almost like cutting with scissors or something. That's the best way to explain it. So I'm drawing this path. And what the path's going to allow me to do is create a selection. So what I'm doing is I'm literally clicking and dragging. And what it's doing is creating this blue line with these points on it. And what the points allow me to do is basically create the shape that mimics the shape of my apple. If I press the Command key, I can then get access to the white arrow. Now, I can also use the toolbar over here for direct selection tool, and that's the same thing. So I can just click here for pen and then here for the white arrow. If I just click the white arrow, though, and go back to the pen, I can just press Command to switch to that white arrow. And what this allows me to do now is I can grab these points and move them around. And there's also these other things. They look like little circles with lines coming out of them. These are called handlebars. What the handlebars do is they change the direction of the line that's between the points. So if you ever heard of vectors before, or vector art, this is how vector art is created. It's with points and lines. And then if you make a shape, you can fill those with a color. So if you've ever heard of vexels or vexel art or something, that's kind of the same thing. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. If you look here in the paths window, let me see if I can make this bigger. There we go. Let me do that here too. I recommend doing this yourself. So again, under the pancake menu for pretty much anything that has like a thumbnail, like for a layer, you can go to panel options and then select the largest thumbnail size. That way you can actually see it really clearly on the screen. I guess if you do something with a lot of layers, that might become a problem, but for what we're doing here, this is sufficient. Okay. So now that I've got this drawn, I'm going to change it and call it Apple so that it has a name. Otherwise, what can happen is you can lose your path pretty quickly. All right, so now I'm going to use this other tool at the bottom of the paths window that looks like a bunch of dots in a circle. And I'm going to click on that. And what that's now created is called a selection. So a selection in Photoshop is basically, this is how it works. So if I have a selection active, what happens is anything inside of that selection is paintable like this, but anything outside of it, no paint can be applied. So it's basically like a mask is what we call that. So that's pretty cool, because what that allows me to do is create a really fast fill that could be like the basic color of the apple. And that's like how you can start. So for instance, I'm gonna pick a nice red color for that. But before I do that, I'm gonna use the Lasso tool. So the Lasso tool is here. It looks like a cowboy lasso, excuse me. It's the third tool down. And what's really cool about this is you can also draw selections like so. But if you use different keys like the Option key and the Shift key, you can actually add to or subtract from selections that already exist. So in this case, the one I use the path for, I'm just going to trim this up a little bit right here because I kind of messed that up. Oops. There we go. So this is pretty great. You can actually use the Lasso tool to kind of trim or add to any selection that you've created. Alternatively, I could just go back to my pen tool drawing and fix that too. So there's many ways kind of to do the same thing. It's really nice. Okay, so I'm gonna do something real quick to be safe, and that is I'm gonna save my selection and then I'm gonna save my file because I haven't done that yet, and that's probably a good idea. So anytime you have a selection with these dotted lines, however you create them, I would recommend saving them. So I'm going to go to Select, Save Selection, and I'm going to call this Apple. Excuse me. And then I'm going to save my file. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I've already got a folder on the desktop that's going to help us out here. And I'm going to call this Apple.psd. So PSD is short for Photoshop document. This window is just asking me if I want to make sure to maximize compatibility. I always say yes to this because I have, older versions of Photoshop on other computers, and like at school, I have different versions of Photoshop. So if you just save it exclusively to one version, like 2020, that could limit your ability to open the file. And of course, when you do client work, that can be a real big problem as well, because you don't know what version they have. All right, so there we go. Now, I can hit Command S anytime to save my document, and I try to do that every so often. One of the biggest problems with digital media is forgetting to save or not saving your files properly and losing your work. So I recommend saving often. Again, that's just under File, Save, and that's Command S. It's real easy. By the way, while you're working, up here in the tab of your file name, oh, whoops. Anytime you make a change, an asterisk will show up next to the file name. That's how you know you need to save it. So that's always important. Okay, so now that I've got my selection saved and I've got the main thing for my Apple done, I'm going to go ahead and pull this down underneath the sketch layer. And this is a new layer that I created for the Apple. I'm going to double click and just call this Apple. And now I want to pick a nice color to use. So there's two panels I use for this. I mentioned this earlier. So I use the Swatches panel and I use the color panel, which somehow got turned off. Okay. There's two things you need to know about this one, this panel color. It's got two parts that you have to choose from. There's the kind of display that it'll show, and then the color spectrum that you want to pick. So what I usually do is I use, let's see, I use the hue cube, and I try to use an RGB spectrum whenever possible. CMYK is good for printing, but a lot of my images don't ever get printed. They're just put on a screen. So if you know for sure that your image is going to be printed, you definitely would prefer CMYK. Otherwise, you can get away with just doing a hue cube, and that should be fine. Most color printers out there, actually the one I use professionally, they prefer RGB images, and they're very good at color matching. So I let the professionals handle that, and I just stick to what makes sense to me, which is, this hue cube, which is, mostly RGB based. So what I would recommend, though, if you're not sure, the general rule of thumb, avoid the upper right hand corner of the hue cube or any kind of like super saturated color. You'll see this little triangle pop up if you do that, and what that's warning you about is that this is not really a printable color. So you want to avoid that. I try to use color palettes that do the same. Not always, there's going to be some saturated colors here and there. So having the color panel helps you kind of like tweak that basically. So you don't have to go exactly with a certain color, but it gets you in the ballpark. And that's why it's nice to have a palette, because it just limits your choices, and then you can like make finer choices from that. Whereas here you have this huge slider bar. There's literally millions of colors to choose from. So that's kind of tough, especially if you haven't done a lot of painting. It's better to stick to a secluded palette like this so that you can just make choices and then tweak your color. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm going to just try to match this based on what I see. I'm not going to use any kind of tool to like sample the colors. That's a bad idea. Remember, this is a digital image, which means it's made up of tiny little pixels. So like if I zoomed in on this with the zoom tool on the Apple, you see that? That's just a big hot mess right there. Anywhere you click, this could be any kind of color. Like it could be magenta or brown or this kind of weird pink color here. There's no way to know. So the tools that we have in Photoshop don't know either. So that's why you really should just use your brain. See what you have, see what colors you have to work with. Like for instance, if you have my color wheel, and just pick something. So I'm going to go with this red color here, and I'm going to go ahead and fill this, making sure I'm on the right layer. And instead of 50% gray, I'm going to use foreground color. There we go. Nice. All right, so that's a good start. I have my sketch in a layer above that. And what I can do there that's really neat is I can change the blending mode of that layer so that I can see my sketch better. Well, blending mode is basically like a camera trick. So I'm going to set my blending mode to multiply, and that's going to make the lines a little bit darker so that I actually see, my sketch. Now, eventually I'm going to get rid of my sketch. I'm not going to use it at all. I'm going to try to make all my edges with color. But this technique of using this selection is going to help me with that, because I don't have to worry about painting outside the lines, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect. So Command D, or under select, you say deselect. What that does is it gets rid of your selection. So now you can not worry about painting inside the lines. You can paint anywhere. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a special layer for the leaf and the stem. So I'm going to call this leaf and stem. Now this time what I'm going to do is, instead of using a selection, I'm just going to paint freehand. So I'm going to find a nice color here that looks like those colors. It's really kind of like a muddy yellow green. So I'm going to try to find that. Okay. Now here's my brush. I'm gonna try to set my brush a little differently right now because I think the opacity is a little bit light, but let me just see what I can do. Yeah, that's not too bad. I think I'll just stick with that. So I'm going to try to paint inside the lines of the sketch that I have. And I'm trying to, make this paint as opaque as possible. In other words, like not see-through. Oh, you know what, guys? I think I just painted this on the wrong layer. I sure did. Oops. Should check my layers. So what I'm doing is I'm just hitting undo, which is Command Z. And what that should let me do is go back. And if I can't do that, I can just erase. So I'm going to erase that real quick. Sorry. Whoops. Okay. So in this layer now, I'm going to do what I was doing before. I think this time, though, I'm going to use a little bit of a darker green than that. I think it was just a little too light for me. I'm also going to zoom in a little bit here so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. Got a little bit of a storm today cooking. Don't know if y'all can hear that. Need the rain though. Okay. Not bad. I can live with that. All right. So now what I've got are these two layers. I've got leaf and stem, and I've got apple. And then of course I've got my sketch. So if I turn off the sketch, this is what it looks like. It just looks like some color slapped on the screen. That's good. So now what I like to do is look at my subject and then try to paint in some larger aspects of color and light. And I try to do those on the actual layer itself. So this is where it can get kind of hard for folks that haven't done this a lot. You got to just try it because what I don't like is layer overkill. I mentioned this earlier. If you start doing too many things on layers, it gets really cumbersome. Just remember that you can always undo and you can always save. So if I save this document right now, hit Command S, then I can also, like, if I make a mistake, then I can just, not save, open this back up and start again. Command Z. And Command key on the Apple, by the way, is this little clover shaped thing. And then the Z key. And on a PC, it's Control C. So use the Control key instead. But Control or Command Z will let you undo stuff. So this is where you hear the most, snickering, I guess, about digital art, because people say, "Oh, you don't have Control Z in real life." Well, that's true. That's one of the advantages of what we do. Not gonna, try to even back off of that. And I have to say, as being a traditional artist first, and then coming into this, yeah, I mean, it's a great advantage. I won't, it's wonderful, but it doesn't always save you, and there are mistakes that you can make that really just you need to start over. It's not really anything you can fix with a key. But on the other hand, conveniently, yeah, there are definitely some advantages to using this. So what I'm going to do is in the Apple layer, I'm going to activate this button. It's called Preserve Transparency or Lock Transparent Pixels. If I click on that, what ends up happening is this will only apply paint to any pixels that exist on the layer. So right now, what that is that. It's just that apple that we painted. So it's pretty great because now I can paint inside the lines, if you will, and not worry about going outside the lines. This is really super, super great for doing what we're about to do now, which is trying to find a shadow color for our apple. So I'm going to start with this kind of reddish purple color like this. Because I want it to have a little bit of color to it, not just be a darker version of red, something like that. And my brush right now, the opacity is 100%, but I'm going to knock that down a little bit. In fact, I don't even have to use this slider up here that I'm doing. I can just hit a key. So if I hit the 8 key, what that should do is make the opacity 80%. And that's pretty cool, because that way I don't have to worry about, you know, like making it too dark or making the paint too thick or anything like that. It's a little bit, it's not too thick, let's say. So what I'm going to do is add in this shadow plane here under the leaf. And because that's on a layer above the apple, I don't have to worry about messing that up. And also I'm painting this nice area back here. And then I'm going to darken that up a little bit here for starters. Like so. And also up here. Nice. Okay. Now for the light end of things, I think this is actually kind of more of a orangish red. In a lot of places, actually, that's what it looks like. So maybe not that bright. So I'm going to change my opacity to like 20%. I'm going to start just kind of adding this in here. Again, the idea is just to get a basic idea of what these colors are. And I'm not trying to blend anything yet. I'm just trying to get a basic idea of where everything is. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so I'm going to switch now to the leaf and stem, and I'm going to press this button again. Looks like a little, I mean, I don't know, looks like the Purina Pet Chow logo. It's just a checkerboard, excuse me. So with that, I'm going to press the Command key now, and that changes my brush to an eyedropper. The eyedropper tool is, where is that? I never can remember where that is, because I use the key switch all the time. I never remember. There it is, right there. it was right there. I didn't even see it. So it's usually, I think, the 5th tool down. It looks literally like an eyedropper. But if you have the brush tool active, you can press Option, and the Option key will give you a switch. So it'll turn your brush into an eyedropper. And now I can click on that because I really just want to use a nice darker green version of this leaf and start painting this in. I think the biggest, hardest thing about digital painting in this way is to mind your layers. That I can't even begin to say how important that is. Like stacking your layers the right way and then painting them in the right order. Because obviously, you know, if I was doing this on the apple layer, that wouldn't work. You know, you wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. And it would paint only in the apple area, and that would get weird. So you just have to be mindful of it. I mean, it can be kind of tedious, and that's why for myself and a lot of artists I know, we just don't use layers very much because it is such a pain to keep up with it. But I think when it comes to just doing something really simple and planning out your colors, this works really well. All right, so I'm getting close to an hour here, which is, I definitely want to do more work on this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do a shadow plane for the apple, but then after that, I'm going to just start painting, and I'm probably going to speed up the video at that point so that, you know, I'll try and like narrate over it later. But for now, just for the sake of time, I want to try and speed this up a little bit. So I'm going to make a new layer and put that under the apple, and I'm going to call this shadow. And this should be pretty nice because now that I've got the apple already done, I can just paint underneath it in this layer, and I won't have to worry about, you know, getting in the way of the apple. And I'll probably just end up freehanding this. And what I mean to say is, like, I literally will just paint this um, without any selections or anything like that, and just use the brush as it is to get that going. Now I'm trying to avoid using pure black and pure white because those really aren't colors, those are values. Values override color. In other words, they're more powerful. So they're very destructive actually to a color image because they kind of detract from it, from the viewer. They're going to be more attuned to looking at these values, if you will, versus the colors. So even this white background that I'm painting in now, it's actually an off-white. And I'm doing that on purpose. I mean, even the photograph, if you look at it, that's not really white. That's kind of like an off, yeah, it's like an off blue, grayish white, if you will. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of, woo, I'm just kind of throwing this in here. And, you know, I like a painterly quality to my work, by the way, although when I start rendering this in a minute, I'm going to speed up the, you know, when the footage goes a little faster, you'll see how I'm rendering stuff. There we go. Okay. Again, I think the biggest advantage of following this method is you don't have to worry about, you know, painting outside the lines or like messing things up. You can, as long as you keep things kind of organized, there's a lot you can do here. All right, so what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start rendering my apple. And I might not talk as much at this point. In fact, I'll probably end up speeding up the video, and maybe we'll put some music to this or something. So just kick back and watch, and you can see me work, and hopefully I can get this done fairly quickly. Okay, so at this point in the painting, basically, this is what I like to call rendering, or some artists call this noodling, like a noodle. So the idea is that you can start to get really detailed now, like once you've laid in the basic ideas of the painting. So um, I think for this video, I'm gonna start wrapping this up because I think the basic idea of it I've presented pretty well. Um, Certainly, I could keep painting this, and I think I will, and then I'll just speed that up too, so that you can watch it. But really, the idea here is um, that I wanted to communicate to you guys is how you can do the basic, um, like putting in shapes to paint with, like I did, and then getting the bigger ideas of your painting down first before you start trying to dive in and do detail. I think that's definitely a lesson that I had to learn over many years. I always wanted to get in and do details and stuff right away, and it took me a long time to learn and figure out that that's not how it works. You have to really look at larger shapes first, which is what using the path tool was all about, and painting the silhouette of the leaf and the stem was all about, because it allows you to get those bigger shapes out of the way. And once you do that, then you can do the shading and the lighting and get that out of the way. And then you can start coming in and doing details like I've done over the last, several minutes here. So, um, if anything, if you can walk away from this demo, kind of thinking about that and trying to put that into practice, that's going to take you a lot further with your work, whether you're drawing out of your head or if you're drawing from life like I'm doing here, or from a photographic reference. Um, just go, the basic lesson is big to small. Don't ever do it backwards, because if you try to go from small to big, you're going to miss all kinds of, larger passages and bigger pieces of information that make up actually, a more interesting part of your subject probably than um, if you were just to ignore that like from the beginning, which I think is it's a it's a common thing. I mean, we all do it. All of us want to just get to that cool finished product, like right away, but that's unfortunately that's not how it works. Real quickly, the other thing I'm doing here is just kind of trying to knock down some of my edges, because if you look at the photograph, you can see where the light kind of merges with the background in a couple of places. Um, I try to do that actually. I try to um, kill off my edges here and there, just to kind of control that uh, look, if you will, give it almost kind of a photographic appeal. Um, but at the same time, I'm not trying to like recreate this photograph. There's so many things here that I kind of either ignored or just have kind of interpreted my own way. I think that's okay. Um, if we wanted to copy a photograph, we could easily do that with, a lot more precision, and that's really not the point. I just want to have something to look at when I draw. And I want to try to use that, say, hey, I want to make an apple, or hey, I want to paint a banana, or some other kind of still life or something like that. That's the only purpose of this. The other thing I'll go ahead and say, although I probably will say this in my other narration, is I am mixing these colors by using the option selection with the brush tool, which if I press option, it switches to the eyedropper tool again, and that's what allows me to kind of select and mix colors. It's okay to do that here, because unlike the photograph, because I'm being a lot more intentional about my color choices, whereas a photograph doesn't do that. A photograph is just this random collection of pixels that don't actually help you. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. I hope this showed you some stuff you can try at home. Um, we're gonna do another video where I will probably talk more in detail about this part of what I'm doing. Like, I'm gonna try and do another still life or I might do a portrait. I haven't decided. And I'm going to just talk more in detail about rendering and choices that you can make while you're trying to do details and stuff like that, so that hopefully you can then also, go back and watch this video again and make, more sense of like what I'm trying to do with these quick rendering things. Because honestly, this is the part that's the hardest to teach. I'm basically just using my knowledge from painting traditionally, and I'm just using brush strokes basically to paint these details. The only thing I guess special is that could mention is I'm thinking of this object as a 3D object. In other words, like I'm not considering it just as a 2D image on a piece of paper, but I'm thinking like, you know, this is really what it looks like. There's, um, let me do this real quick. Sorry. So there's basically like longitudinal and latitudinal lines that make up the shape, right? And I can kind of see that, like if you look at the skin of the apple, it's got these striations or whatever on the skin. Not to mention the way that it's shaded, right? Because on the right side, there's this big shadow, and on the left side, there's a nice little highlight there. And so whenever I'm painting anything, I try to like imagine what I'm drawing here. If there's anybody out there that's watching this that is into 3D sculpting or 3D art, that knowledge can really help you with painting, because I think where most of us kind of, I think a lot of us struggle with rendering stuff is we don't think like this. We're really just thinking of a 2D shape on a piece of paper that we're trying to emulate, or copy or draw or whatever, or something in our head, that is 3D. But, you have to understand like the three-dimensional aspect of objects that you draw, so that when you consider their edges and you consider um, the planes that they make up and all that stuff, like this leaf is actually kind of like a plane. It's like a flat piece of paper that's curving and changing shape. It's really important to understand that, because when you're rendering stuff, you want to try and make it look realistic, like it actually has a form and shape. So this is what I do in my head as I try to, have these lines that show like the three dimensionality of an object while I'm painting, so that that's what helps me figure out like where to put light and stuff like that. Sometimes it's just not what the photograph says either. Um, and you have to kind of, think in terms of a three-dimensional way to figure out like where all these lights go and shadows and things like that. And that's what allows you to draw your head. And I think it just takes a lot of study. You have to study 3D objects a lot, and you have to, um, so if you have a camera, or, your phone has a camera, like if you see anything that's, when you're out there that interests you at all, I think you should take a picture of it, store it for later. It could just be something simple like a car that you like, or a statue that you like, or a tree, or whatever. Take a picture of it, take it home, and do like what we're doing here. Just start painting, draw it, study it. And what'll happen is over time, your brain is really going to start to figure things out. And when you start to want to draw things out of your head that you can't actually photograph or see, you'll have all this practice that'll allow you to do that, or at least make a really educated guess about what that's going to look like. That's the idea. So anyway, I could definitely go on with this, and I think if this was an actual face-to-face thing, we'd have more time that you'd be able to work, and then I could sit and watch you, or I could do more on this and stuff. But I'm already pushing an hour and a half here, so I think I'm going to just wrap this up. Don't ever forget to sign your work, if you ever do any artwork. And the pen tool is pretty great for that. So, excuse me, the Wacom pen. So, don't ever forget to sign your work. And I try to make this in a square shape So that way you could put this on Instagram pretty easily. So, you know, just give it a quick little signature, and then you can crop it and save it. I'll probably cover that in another video this week in terms of how to crop and save your images for Instagram and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And again, let me do this real quick before I forget. If anybody has any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me. This is my email address at Kennesaw State. It's cbrasco@kennesaw.edu. Any questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. If you need the files that I used today, like the brushes or the palette or the apple, I'm happy to send any or all of those to you as well. So anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next video.